Welcome to the fifth video in this short series of videos I'm recording in honor of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the release of my most recent book. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the first four videos, I invite you to do that. As usual, I'm going to begin with a quote and then say a few words about it. So the quote I chose for today is the following. We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when a boy, as civilized society to remain ever under the regime of their barbarous ancestors. It is patriotic to revisit, reconsider, and revise the work of the framers. Anyone who says otherwise needs to go back and reread what the framers had to say. That's why I started with that quote from Thomas Jefferson. And in fact, I had difficulty choosing quotes because there are so many different quotes from so many framers, both well-known and otherwise, which make similar points. And the points they're making are three. The first is that the Constitution, as it was written, and as it was put up for ratification and passed, was imperfect. Nevertheless, the framers felt that it should be ratified anyways. Number two, they were not in favor of frequent changes to the Constitution, but they did support thoughtful, careful reform of the document. And number three, they understood the need to leave it to future generations to reform the document when necessary. So I'm going to let the framers speak in their own words on this. First, Thomas Jefferson. The quote that I read, at least a part of the quote that I read, comes from a letter he wrote in 1816. And another part of the quote that I didn't read says, "Some men look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant too sacred to be touched." It's a reflection again of the first point that I made, that neither he nor the other framers thought the Constitution as written was perfect. He then goes on to say that he is not an advocate for frequent, untried changes in constitutions, and that you should bear with moderate imperfections, but that if, as time goes by, and life changes and there's scientific, technological, and other advances, then reform is necessary. He finished this quote by calling it preposterous to think that future generations would live under a regime constructed by their founders. In short, change is necessary. Another framer, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton conceived of the Federalist Papers, these 85 essays that were written to convince New Yorkers to ratify the Constitution. And in the 85th paper, he said the following: "I never expect to see perfect work from imperfect man. Nevertheless, despite the imperfections of the document, he urged New Yorkers to ratify the document and reform it later." Another example, George Washington, President of the Convention, first President of the United States, one of the most beloved figures both during his time in office and in American history overall. Shortly after the Constitutional Convention and then the ratification, he said the following: "The warmest friends to and the biggest and best supporters of the Constitution do not contend that it is free from imperfection." Likewise, the individual who's commonly thought of as the father of the Constitution, although that is certainly an overstatement, he had a huge hand in the Constitution nevertheless, similarly said, "I am not one of the number who think the Constitution a faultless work." And then finally, I'll speak of a less well-known but nevertheless important founder and one of my personal favorites, Gouverneur Morris. Gouverneur Morris is known as the penman of the Constitution, and he wrote the 7 most famous words in all of American political history, the preamble to the Constitution, "We the people of the United States." But shortly before his death, he, being a founder who spent almost as much time at the convention as Madison, he was very active at the convention. Shortly before his death in 1815, he said the following of the Constitution: "Nothing human can be perfect. Surrounded by difficulties, we did the best we could, leaving it to those who should come after us to take counsel from experience and exercise prudently the power of amendment." There is no question that the original document was, as Morris, Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, the list goes on, all of the framers agreed, was defective from the start. You only have to look at the fact that it countenanced the sin of slavery to acknowledge that point. And there are other imperfections as well. But the reason that it's important to think about this now is because, as I mentioned in the last video, we need to think about revisiting, upstreaming to revisit what the framers did at the convention and consider whether any amendments or changes to it are in order today. Every time you do that, though, even the talk of that raises questions of whether you are unpatriotic. And so it's important to underscore the fact that nothing could be further from the truth. 2, almost a 1, the framers understood that the Constitution was imperfect, and they said so numerous times. Number 2, they said despite its imperfections, it should be ratified and altered carefully, only when necessary later. And number 3, they underscored the fact that, as Jefferson said, it would be preposterous to think that 250 years after the document was written, that it should still be the law of the land without any changes to it, given the advancements in society, technology, economy, and the like. And remember Jefferson's analogy. It would be as preposterous to think that a constitution unchanged could guard over human beings 250 years later as it would be to expect a grown man to wear the coat that he wore as a boy.